Marianne's illness changes more than her health. It changes the way she sees herself and forces her to confront something she has avoided throughout the novel. For most of Sense and Sensibility, Marianne believes that honesty means experiencing every emotion completely and expressing those feelings openly. If she is happy, she sees no reason to hide it. If she loves someone, she believes that love should be obvious and passionate rather than controlled by social expectations. If she is heartbroken, pretending to be fine feels almost dishonest. Marianne has always trusted emotion because emotion feels real. To her, feelings are proof of truth. Eleanor's restraint often seems confusing and even unnatural because Marianne cannot understand why someone would hide something so important. Why measure every word? Why hold back pain? Why act calm when the heart is suffering? But as Marianne's heartbreak begins affecting her health, she is forced to confront the limits of living entirely through emotion. Her illness becomes a turning point because she can no longer spend every moment searching for explanations about Willoughby. She cannot continue replaying every conversation or building a future around memories of what she believed their relationship was. For the first time, Marianne has to stop reacting and begin reflecting. Jane Austen does not change Marianne into a completely different person, because that would go against the entire purpose of the story. Marianne does not need to become Eleanor. She does not need to stop feeling deeply or lose the passion that makes her unique. Instead, she must learn what happens when emotion controls every decision and when feelings become stronger than reality. Her growth is not about becoming less emotional. It is about learning that emotions need wisdom and balance. As Marianne begins recovering, she looks back at the way she handled her relationship with Willoughby. She realizes how completely she allowed her happiness to depend on another person. She begins to understand the pain her suffering caused the people who loved her, especially her family and Eleanor. Most importantly, she begins to see her sister differently. For much of the novel, Marianne believed Eleanor's calmness meant that Eleanor did not feel as deeply. She assumed that because Eleanor did not openly express pain, that pain must not exist. But Marianne eventually learns the truth. Eleanor had been suffering too. Eleanor had been carrying the knowledge that Edward Ferrars was connected to Lucy Steele. She had watched the future she quietly imagined disappear, yet she continued supporting Marianne through her heartbreak. She offered comfort while experiencing her own private loss. This realization changes Marianne's understanding of emotion. She begins to see that visible suffering is not the only proof of love or pain. Eleanor loved Edward. Eleanor hoped for a future with him. Eleanor was hurt when that future seemed impossible. The difference between the sisters was never the depth of their feelings. The difference was how they carried those feelings. Marianne begins to understand that restraint is not always coldness. Sometimes restraint is strength. Sometimes it is compassion. Sometimes people control their emotions because others depend on them. A person can feel deeply without allowing every emotion to control their actions. However, Austen does not suggest that Eleanor's approach is perfect either. Eleanor has become so skilled at hiding her pain that almost no one realizes when she needs support. She protects Marianne from unnecessary worry. She protects her mother from distress. She protects Lucy's secret even though carrying that knowledge causes her pain. But the question remains, who protects Eleanor? Her self-control is admirable, but when taken too far, it becomes isolation. Eleanor's lesson is just as important as Marianne's. She must learn that strength does not mean carrying every burden alone. This is why the title Sense and Sensibility is much more complicated than simply choosing one sister over the other. Austen is not arguing that reason is better than emotion or that emotion is better than reason. She is showing that both qualities are necessary. Eleanor needs some of Marianne's openness, and Marianne needs some of Eleanor's judgment. While Marianne begins changing, Edward Ferrars remains trapped by his secret engagement to Lucy Steele. His situation creates one of the novel's most difficult moral questions because Edward no longer wants to marry Lucy. His feelings have changed, and he loves Eleanor. However, years earlier, he gave Lucy his word. Edward faces a choice between personal happiness and responsibility. Ending the engagement would allow him to be with Eleanor, but it would also mean breaking a promise because keeping that promise had become inconvenient. Edward chooses to honor his commitment, even though doing so costs him his relationship with Eleanor and damages his relationship with his family. Readers may disagree with Edward's decision. Some may believe he should have ended the engagement sooner. Others may see his willingness to sacrifice his own happiness as evidence of his character. Austen leaves room for that debate, but she makes one thing clear. Edward's choices separate him from Willoughby. Willoughby chooses financial security even though his decision hurts Marianne. Edward appears willing to lose financial security because he refuses to escape an obligation dishonorably. Both men experience pressure, but their responses reveal their character. Then the situation changes because of Lucy Steele. The engagement that seemed impossible to escape begins to collapse when Edward loses the advantages Lucy once valued. His family rejects him, his future becomes uncertain, and suddenly Lucy's expectations change. Lucy eventually marries Robert Ferrars, Edward's younger brother. The engagement that controlled so much of the story disappears almost immediately. Edward is finally free, not because he broke his promise, not because Eleanor interfered, and not because someone created a dramatic solution. The circumstances simply changed. For Eleanor, the news is overwhelming. She has spent so long accepting that Edward was unavailable that freedom feels almost impossible to believe. When Edward finally has the ability to choose, he chooses Eleanor. Their relationship reaches its conclusion in the same quiet way it began. There is no dramatic performance or exaggerated declaration. Their love has always been based on respect, conversation, and understanding. Edward's proposal feels natural because it completes something that has been developing throughout the entire novel. For the first time, Eleanor no longer has to hide everything she feels. Her happiness becomes visible. This moment matters because readers understand how much emotional weight she has carried in silence. Marianne's heartbreak was obvious to everyone around her. Eleanor's heartbreak required people to look closer. Now Eleanor finally receives the happiness she had been too careful to hope for. Marianne's own future also begins to change through Colonel Brandon. Earlier in the novel, Marianne barely notices him. Compared with Willoughby, Brandon seems too serious, too quiet, and too reserved. He does not immediately match Marianne's energy or create the intense emotional connection she values. But experience changes the way Marianne sees people. Willoughby was exciting, but Colonel Brandon is dependable. Willoughby created immediate passion, but Colonel Brandon provides loyalty and stability. He remains present when life becomes difficult. Marianne begins recognizing qualities she once overlooked. Colonel Brandon's affection is not dramatic or overwhelming. It is patient, consistent, and genuine. Some readers question Marianne's eventual marriage to Colonel Brandon, wondering whether she simply settled after being hurt by Willoughby. But Austen's message is more complicated than that. Marianne does not lose her personality. She still loves music, literature, and beauty. She still feels deeply. What changes is her understanding of what truly matters in another person. She learns that intensity is not the same as sincerity. Shared interests are not the same as loyalty. Charm is not the same as character. Willoughby also returns briefly to the story, complicating the way readers see him. He admits that his feelings for Marianne were real. He did love her, but he still chose financial security over that love. This is one of Austen's most realistic observations. A person can have genuine feelings and still make selfish choices. Love alone does not guarantee good character. Willoughby's emotions may have been sincere, but his decisions still caused harm. Austen does not make understanding the same as forgiveness. She allows readers to recognize why people make certain choices without pretending those choices are always acceptable. John Dashwood can explain why he kept his money. Lucy Steele can explain why wealth mattered to her. Willoughby can explain why he chose security. Understanding motivation does not remove responsibility. By the end of the novel, both Eleanor and Marianne have changed, but neither has abandoned who she is. Eleanor still values judgment and careful thought, but she has learned that strength does not require complete silence. Marianne still values emotion and passion, but she has learned that feelings should be examined before they become certainty. Neither sister becomes the other. Instead, they move closer to balance. That is the true meaning behind the title Sense and Sensibility. Sense alone is not enough because reason without emotion can become isolation. Sensibility alone is not enough because emotion without judgment can make assumptions feel like facts. Austen does not ask readers to choose between the heart and the mind. She asks what happens when people learn to use both. The Dashwood sisters began the novel believing they understood themselves and the world around them. Life challenged those beliefs. Eleanor discovered that sharing feelings does not make her weaker. Marianne discovered that honesty does not require surrendering completely to every emotion. Both sisters experience disappointment. Both are forced to question the people they trusted. Both leave the story with a deeper understanding of love, character, and themselves. Because Sense and Sensibility is not simply a story about finding the right person. It is a story about becoming someone capable of seeing people more clearly. In Part 4, we move beyond the plot and explore what Jane Austen may truly be saying about money, marriage, first impressions, human nature, and the balance between sense and sensibility. Thank you for listening to Small Books. Continue to Part 4, What Austen Really Meant.